As we look here at transitioning to the second hour, we're going to have a panelist of people addressing a plethora of questions related to executing agile leadership and reaching agile organization goals. We have John Hasse, who was one of the first movers with Scrum in the Navy. And so the question that I'm going to pose to you, John, is how can we get more agile? What's worked for you in the past, and what's your current way ahead?
That's interesting. So how can we get more agile? I guess my response is going to say that there's probably a level of commitment you have, like there's a threshold that you have to be willing to hit. And I'm going to give two levels because we're talking about being agile here. And so for me, in my experiences, agile has meant implementing the Scrum framework, which is again the framework that's 25 years old and is the minimum viable set of roles, behaviors, and artifacts that have proven successful for cross-functional teams across a number of organizations, right? But in order to do that, you have to have a team that's dedicated to doing that and implementing it, which takes a certain level of effort in order to learn what's happening, a certain amount of release of control in order to build autonomous teams. It takes a certain amount of openness to learn. It takes a certain amount of courage to be honest with each other. It takes a certain amount of courage to be transparent and to show your work to others for regular inspections. And there's a lot of people who may not be willing to have that level of commitment, right? So I'm going to give you two tiers for maybe a level that would folks that would be devoted to doing that, and then folks who are maybe below that threshold. So how can we be agile if we're willing to cross that threshold? Well, you can reach out to John Margolick, the NavalX, and the Centers for Adaptive Warfighting. You can send your entire team through a Scrum training course, which is focused around teaching and launching teams in order to do that. And then you can implement it, and you can just track the results because the metrics are built in. So that's a way to be agile. But agile does not necessarily just mean doing Scrum, right? Scrum is a way to be agile, but agility exists outside of it. Because if you look at the pedigree of agility, a lot of it, even though Scrum is older, XP is older, Crystal is older, all these agile methods and tools are older than the Agile Manifesto. Back in 2001 in Snowbird, out at the ski resort there in Idaho, they had a number of leaders within the software industry decode what agility meant, and they agreed on terms and principles which became known as the Agile Manifesto, right? And that was agnostic to, say, the Scrum framework, or to extreme programming, or to the other thought leaders that contributed to that document. And so what I'd say is if you just want to be agile in that more general sense, right, you're able to do that, I think, by doing three things that we all already know how to do, that we all know are important. And those three things are, we want to inspect, we want to adapt, and we want to deliver. Another way to think about that is learn, we want to reflect, and we want to deliver. So anyway, inspect, adapt, and deliver. By doing those three things and doing them to each other, we can increasingly build agility. So what do I mean by that? I mean that we can inspect our adaptability, we can inspect our delivery, we can adapt our inspection, adapt our delivery, we can deliver our inspection, deliver our adaptability, right? So by continually doing all that, you can be agile without implementing any particular framework. So those are two thresholds that folks can use. If you want to use the Scrum framework to be agile, you're certainly welcome to do that. If you want to do agility without implementing that discipline framework, you can do it by, I think, doing those three activities iteratively and openly, right? And so I hope that answers the question.
Hey, John, just to kind of jump in and maybe answer the question in the same way, Scrum is a great place to get started if you're not sure where to start. But like John was kind of mentioning, it's not necessarily the overarching answer to all your problems. But really, I think you should start evaluating in your organization exactly how it is that you make decisions, and make sure that those decisions are being made quickly and that they make sense for people. and making sure that you have feedback loops within your organization to evaluate the decisions that you make.
So I'll jump in. I think one of the big things about agility is being honest within your organization and asking why. In the military, we often get, hey, this is the mission, and execute. And here is the general task and purpose. But one thing that I learned a lot from doing the Scrum courses and teaching the Scrum courses is a lot of the lean principles, and the major one being who is your customer? So who within your organization is your customer? Generally, we think of that as your boss, whoever direct hire is, and then the organization. But going deeper into that and asking what service you're providing and what service you're providing and who's affected by that, and really why you're doing that, can drive that thought process to better analyze why you're doing things, which brings up what you can do better and constantly reevaluating that.
Hey, I'll jump in real quick. So if the question is still, how do we become more agile? I'd like to answer it in sort of the negative. Like how do we not do business, right? And I can tell you from experience that you don't become more agile by marching into the teeth of the bureaucracy within which we exist. It's akin to rushing headlong into a machine gun belching 200 rounds per minute, right? This type of mentality, I think the startup mentality inside the bureaucracy requires some maneuver warfare, as my mentor, Lieutenant Colonel Simon Newell of Installation Next likes to call it. I think taking what John said and blowing it out to the macro level, for me, the most important part of being agile in the organization is storytelling. Something I'm still learning how to do, but telling people inside and outside your organization what it is you're doing and why it's important. Going back to one of the points that Lieutenant Colonel Henry made, is that people need to know why they need to change. What product are you providing? What service are you providing? Why do people care? That to me has been the toughest challenge, and something I'm still learning how to do.
Yeah, I have something to add to that. I think to go along with that, that's why the mission is so important. So if the group understands what they're working towards and having a clear mission, having the transparency within the team, that helped us with folks outside of our branch, outside of our group, to understand what we're working on, how we're working on it, how we're working through those things. I think every organization strives to be agile, but if you can see those tasks and how they're broken down, apply those to a schedule, let the customer prioritize them, that helps get folks involved.
I'll make another quick point just for clarification, perhaps also. A lot of talk about agility. I think we had some good definitions of them earlier. One that I found helpful, and many others do also, is that to be agile means that we reduce the cost of changing our mind, right? And what that means is that you can release and stop work and change without having delivered nothing of value. So agility really is like the art of making it easy to change your mind and not be committed to the same path. It's a way to allow you to respond to real life. And what I'll say is that if you look at the most recent SECNAV vector that came out about agility, which several of the other speakers have already mentioned, I thought it was brilliant because it laid out a concrete example of doing just that. They were talking about like the maintenance availability for one of the hospital ships and how they on short notice wrapped that up and deployed them. And that's an example where we sort of advertised to ourselves that we achieved agility because we changed our mind and did it, right? We reduced the cost of changing our mind. We were able to reallocate resources to deal with real life. And that is like the perfect example of agility at scale. And so I think that's useful for us to hold forward and to sort of reemphasize the point that many other speakers have already made, you can't do that if you don't know your product and you don't know who your customers are, because you can't deliver, right, until you've clarified those things. So that is incredibly important, right? Without knowing your customers and stakeholders and not understanding your product, and I know those are kind of weird terms to use within military circles, but like, your product could be service. I hope that everybody in the military's primary product that we produce is service to our nation, right? So like, even if you don't believe that you have a product, like please adopt that as your product going forward. But like, until you understand your customers and your product, agility will never be within grasp, right? Because it won't even make sense. To deliver anything that matters to your customers, to your stakeholders, like those just won't be terms that apply. So I'd encourage anyone interested in agility to think through those things, right? How do I reduce the cost of changing my mind? Who is my customer? What is my product, right? And how can I deliver it as quickly as possible? So hopefully that's kind of helpful framework and some foundation that anybody can apply to their current situation. Because look, here's the thing about it, right? We talked about agility before, and I said there's 3 things that we need to do to be agile: inspect, take a look at what we're doing, adapt, change and become better based on reality, and deliver, right? Deliver means deliver your product to your customers. So if you're, that's not hard. All of us can do that now at just a very sort of fundamental way of being agile. The hard part is applying it to you and your team. And the hard part is applying it to you and your work, right? Who is your team? What is your product, right? How do we inspect? How do we adapt? How do we increase the amount of delivery so we don't have big surprises at the end? That's the foundational work that you and your teams, wherever you're at within the department, have to do, or else agility will never make sense to you. Agility will be reduced to a set of steps and rules that you'll have to convince people to use until you adopt this more foundational principle that like people are relying on you to deliver something, and agility means you deliver it with reduced cost and reduced speed in order to get more feedback and deliver it better next time. So that's really like foundational work that I would encourage anyone in this discussion to apply to themselves and to their teams, because it is a really fruitful time. Like on a Friday when you have just a moment, you know, take that time to talk about, hey, how did we do this week to deliver something that mattered to the people relying on us? No jargon there at all, right? But everybody can have that conversation, and I would encourage you to do it.
I think to go along with that, there's two sayings that I always keep in mind in talking about agile, and one is there's always a path for the determined, and the other is be flexible or you break. So when we're working within a team, there's always a solution out there, and we need to be able to move on and continue to find that solution. And then those within the group, you know, be flexible. You may, you know, if I think it was spoken in a previous webinar about being uncomfortable. And that speaks directly to being flexible and understanding that, you know, you're going to have to change in order to continue to adapt, and through that, trusting one another is a big part of that.
I'll caveat off that real quick. Another thing I wrote down in terms of how do we become more agile is just something to remember, and it does go back to Clausewitz of war is a human endeavor. All of this is a human endeavor. So as many processes and policies we put in place, it's about the team, it's about the individuals who are executing and how do they work best together. We were supposed to do a Scrum course for MAG 39 actually this week, but COVID-19 happened. But when setting that up, they teach Lean Six Sigma within the group. And they were asking, so what are these new tools like Scrum? What's it all about? How is this different than Lean? And the biggest thing I see from Scrum, which I'm a big advocate for, is that yes, it provides a framework for agility, but most importantly, it provides a framework for how your team can interact together and how you can make sure everyone has a voice. So they want to do better. So they want to be agile and improve the situation they're in, and provide a better product.
So I'll make a quick follow-up to that, because I've heard Lean, I think 3, maybe 4 times so far during just our hour of the discussion here. And there's a lot of people that ask the question, what's the difference? What's the difference between Lean and agility? And I had a really useful opportunity to speak to a black belt, someone professional in the finance world who this is what they did for their organization is they were a Lean Six Sigma black belt. And I got to talk with him about what's the difference, right? And here's my understanding of the difference based on that conversation and others, is that Lean removes waste in repeatable, predictable processes, right? That's the first. The second is that Lean has dedicated improvement events over several days that outsiders come in and participate in to improve your team, right? Scrum, on the other hand, or the practice of agility, if we want to abstract it, says that what you do is you prepare for the unknown and unknowable future, and you continually respond to it in a way that does not necessarily produce the most efficiency, which is what Lean is after, but in order to produce the most relevant response to the real world at any given day, right? So that's the big first difference, is that Lean looks to produce efficiency, agility looks to respond to a changing and relevant world, right? To meet the world where it is. The second thing is that, right, we talked about Lean has sort of dedicated improvement events where outsiders come into your team to improve the process. Right. What Scrum learned from Lean is to bake that in every week, 2, 3, 4, have it on a recurring basis. The team does it for themselves all the time. So they're continually learning and trying to implement things that they're learning through discovery, right? So I hope that's a helpful way. Being agile is not about getting the most for your money. Being agile means that your money meets the real world in a way that matters, right? If you want to get the most from your money, you can just lean out a process and you will produce as many widgets as possible, right? But agility would say that the world cares about whatever widgets you make. So that's kind of the difference between the two, and I hope that's a helpful distinction.
Hey John, I just want to touch on it slightly a little bit. I think that was a really good explanation. Having some Lean training as well as being introduced to Agile, I think it's important to look at where they came from. Both are looked at creating systems and making systems better, but Lean really comes out of the manufacturing world. And so a lot of those processes, like John was saying, are long-term processes, not a lot of change in manufacturing, but Agile is built out of software where technology changes maybe a little bit more rapidly. And if your system isn't changing at the pace that it needs to be, it becomes outdated a lot quicker. So Agile is a framework that it took a lot of those lessons learned from Lean and really updated it to the kind of changing environment that's more fast-paced in the 21st century. I think is another good way to, hopefully we're not beating a dead horse on that topic, but.
I think that builds out really nicely. And I would actually add that somebody pointed out in the comments here, it's Scrum and Lean, not Scrum or Lean. And in keeping with what you're saying, Aaron, I would actually say that it's Scrum just routinizes Lean and makes it easy for you to run a substantial portion of it yourself without needing those outside experts and the time spent with outsiders, just making sure that every single week you find a way to continuously improve. So in the same way that it's routinizing, hey, we need to do some forward planning and figuring out why we're going to do this thing. Hey, we need to routinize syncing up every day so everybody understands what's happening on the team and we can send a lot fewer emails trying to figure out who's got what or where it's stored or whether we need to do it, right? One of the neat things about it, I think in our experience, has been that if you practice just the steps of a good Agile tool, and it can be Scrum or anything else, but I think Scrum has worked for probably everybody on this call as I look down the names, all the things that we practice in Mission Command, all the things that you practice in a continuous process improvement world, and opportunities for all the things that you practice in a design thinking or a lean startup world as well, are programmed in so that you don't have to think about whether or when to do those things. You have to do them every single day. You have to do it in order to prep your stickies or whatever you're using to keep track of tasks the right way. And it makes it easy so that you don't have to think about it. And friction reduction, to John's point about reducing the cost of changing your mind, is a big part of the name of the game as you're practicing anything that's Agile, and having tools that make it really easy to do that sort of simple dance that makes it possible to have fun in the club without worrying about all the other stuff that you might need to
do the dance, John. Do the dance. Come on, do the dance.
Right.
Everybody wants to see it. Come on, I know what you're thinking. Yeah.
Nobody else? Is it just me? Is it?
It's it.
You guys. Simple gets you there. 101, and then the rest of it you can do, and it's all kind of programmed in if you're doing it the right way.
Yeah, I'll give a really quick, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I found it really useful, maybe others will. So what happened was Jeff Sutherland, who invented Scrum 25 years ago, was teaching a public class once, and it was actually in France, and he had a lean black belt in the class who was just taking his course because he thought it was interesting. A lot of focus here. Come on, camera. I got a new Samsung 5G phone. It's pretty sweet, but the autofocus is struggling. Sorry. All right, there we go. So this black belt is constantly going up to Jeff in the middle of the class and saying, Jeff, you got to scrum the scrum. Like, you got to scrum the scrum. And Jeff could like not figure out what this black belt was talking about. And then eventually, you know, the story goes that he said, you know, I understand. And that became the retrospective, which in Scrum, at the end of a sprint, the team gathers for one of the 5 events, which is known as a retrospective. And that's where the team, instead of looking at the product, looks at the team, right? So that feedback from the lean community brought this idea of a Kaizen, continuous improvement, good change in Japanese, into Scrum, where at the end of the sprint, which sprints are 1 to 4 weeks long in Scrum, better to be on the short side. So if you can, do 1 week sprints for all you Scrum teams out there, my pro tip. But so what Jeff did is he brought that into the Scrum framework and created an event, John, just like you said, where you have to, if you're going to do Scrum, you have to do this event that looks at a continuous improvement for your team. Right? And that was the big idea. It wasn't about improving the product. It was about improving the team. And most teams still, even Scrum teams, still get this wrong. So here's how you do it. You identify what that continuous improvement event is, and then you have to give it acceptance criteria. Right? So acceptance criteria means that you can prove that it was done or not done. There's some falsifiable definition associated with what that task would be, right? And so what you would do is you would take that continuous improvement event, you would write on a sticky with an acceptance criteria, you would give it 1 point, and you would put it in your sprint backlog, meaning the entire team was devoting themselves to accomplishing this one team improvement event every week. So imagine that you're part of a team and you're running 1 week sprints, you get 52 a year, which means that 52 times in your year together as a team, you'll have identified something that you could do better to work together as a team, and you'll have done it, right? If that's 1 or 2% improvement each time, you will become unstoppable as a team. So that's how Lean taught Scrum, and Scrum implemented in an event, John, just like you were talking about, in order to make teams better.